Today on the Bourbon Bytes podcast, the 15-month tariff on Scotch is officially dead, the launch of a new whiskey-focused AI, and Beyoncé takes full ownership of SirDavis Whiskey. Then I have a bite-sized review of a bourbon that's supporting local firefighters and first responders. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Bourbon Bytes podcast. I'm your host Clifton, and this is the week of July 30th, 2026. We are wrapping out a very busy month here in the world of whiskey news, but we're about to get into the fall, so that means there's going to be more coming in than ever. But we do have a few news stories here today that are exciting and ones that are good conversation starters. So I'm excited to talk about them, and hopefully you're just as excited to hear them. So let's get into it. The first piece of news is very exciting for Scotch enthusiasts because the 10% US tariff on Scotch is gone as of this week. This tariff lasted for about 15 months, and each of those had about 20 million pounds a month of losses, which is crazy because the US is the largest market for Scotch by value overall. So this 10% duty did a lot of damage, and we saw prices increase across the board, and weirdly enough, bottles also became harder to find because they just weren't selling. But the controversy is there's a chance that these prices may not come down even though the tariffs are gone, and that's just because of the overall cost of production of whiskey. I mean, inflation is crazy across the board, so while it is a short-term win, there's no guarantee that the bottle prices are going to start coming down to where they were. The Whiskey Watch has a really great article on this. You can check it out on their website. It breaks down all the numbers and the percentages of how much was slipping. They did a poll of people to see, how the tariff affected people's whiskey purchases. Really insightful info there, but I'm hopeful that this means that the market starts picking up again. I think people were turned off by these tariffs and they were starting to look into other sources of whiskey. Don't get me wrong, I love buying American whiskey or whiskey from other regions, but I think Scotch is such an important part of whiskey culture, and I think their sales being down like 20 million pounds a month is crazy. A good point they make overall is this could be beneficial for Scotch beyond just the bottles on the shelves. A lot of different distilleries are pulling out of festivals and activations in the US because of this tariff, but now that it seems like things have kind of reset a bit, there's a chance that the marketing inside the US may change. They may start coming back out to America, promoting their brands and kind of getting things the way they used to be. I think I would love to see more of that for sure. So while I do think it's an overall win for the Scotch whiskey market, I do think it's going to take a while for us to actually see some of those benefits. And do I think that they're going to pass those savings on to us? We'll see. I just doubt it in today's market with everything else going on. Speaking of other things going on, here's an interesting one. So there's a website called CASKD. It's CASKD, and it is a platform for the UK for selling and trading bottles. Now, of course, this is not legal in the US, but in the UK, they actually are allowed to do trades as long as it's not on like a retail level scale. This was news to me. I actually had no idea that this was legal in the UK. But what CASKD has done is launched CASKD AI, which is the first AI that I'm aware of that is developed for Scotch enthusiasts. They say that this one has been purposefully built to understand the unique characteristics of Scotch whiskey, including distilleries, maturation, independent bottlers, auction markets, and investment trends. They said they've programmed it with market valuation, marketplace research, collection analysis, whiskey expertise, and of course, CASKD support for their platform, including things like pricing, fees, everything like that. And while I haven't decided how much I want to dive into this and see, how good it actually is, I think it is an interesting application to see this vast world of whiskey knowledge kind of being fed to build an AI, large language model. I'm sure people are already using AI to research different bottles, based on what they like. And I'm sure it's pulling in data from whiskey reviewers like myself, whether we like it to or not. But it's exciting to see one purposely built for the collectors. Now, I'm not sure if they're also pulling from other sources as well. It would be cool if it was totally proprietary and it was just pulling in, the databases from the, the liquor stores and everything like that. I think that would be really cool. But knowing how AI works, I have a feeling there's probably a lot of hallucinations in there in terms of like what it suggests based on what people like. And also just based on what I've used AI for in terms of researching whiskey, a lot of the info, it gets really confused on on outdated info. So it'll start showing you prices from like 10 years ago, which are no longer accurate. So you really have to be careful when researching whiskey with AI. I think it's a great starting point. And I think maybe this platform might be even more carefully nuanced since they are considering market valuation. But I just wanted to touch on it because I know people have different feelings on AI. Would you or have you used AI to research whiskey or check market valuations or, track your collection? I'd love to hear what your use cases are for it. Now, the next story I'm crazy in love with because Beyoncé has taken full ownership of the SirDavis American Whisky brand. Back in 2024, she released this brand along with Moët Hennessy, which is, of course, the large wine and spirits brand. And for this whiskey, she collaborated with the head blender for the brand, Cameron George, who's a great guy. I've had him on the channel before talking about a different brand. So this was all a collaboration between the brand and Beyoncé herself. But now it's been announced that she has full ownership of the brand, which is interesting because SirDavis was the first spirit brand made from scratch in the US by Moët Hennessy. So it's interesting to see that they're, giving that up and Beyonce's taking ownership of it. What that means for the brand, I'm not sure. I hope Cameron can still be involved in it because, like I said, he comes from a really great background in whiskey making, especially in Scotch. So I'm excited to see what else is coming from the brand. I've heard that they are doing other releases, not just this initial release. The first one I was just a little meh about. It was a mash bill, 51% rye, 49% malted barley. Was a unique finish, wasn't quite my favorite, but I've heard that there's going to be future releases of this, and I love that Beyonce is so invested in it that she's going to take full ownership. Now, with that, we'll see how much she does with the brand. Hopefully, she keeps the team in place that's, crafted this whiskey. I love the bottle. I always praise the bottle. It's really, really cool. But I don't know. I'm excited about this. I think, it's always great to see celebrities not just be a face or a name on a whiskey, but actually have, faith in the brand and, have some financial stakes in it. Because I swear a lot of celebrity whiskeys, they have nothing to do with it. They're just there to market the product. But I don't know. I trust Beyonce's palate. I think she's probably pretty good at knowing what her fans want. So I'm excited for the future and congrats to her. If you ever want to be interviewed on the podcast, hit me up. All right, we got a couple new whiskey releases to talk about today before we get into our bite-sized review. The first of which is a new 8-year bottled in bond bourbon from Bib and Tucker. This is a 100 proof expression. It's going to come out in September of this year. Bib and Tucker is a brand that I really haven't reported on a lot, and I think it's just because it flies under the radar. But seeing an 8-year bottled in bond expression come from them is pretty exciting. Now, this is going to be distilled at Tennessee Distilling Group in Tennessee. So it's not George Dickel. I think in the past they had used George Dickel for some of their releases. So that's a little good to see. I'm not a big fan of the George Dickel flavor profile. But this sounds really good. They distilled this back in spring of 2018. They say they used a high rye mash bill with this one and it's non-chill filtered. And the best part is it's coming in for just $65 a bottle. So this is one that I'm going to keep an eye out for sure. I think I'd love to revisit the brand, give it another try because like I said, some of the ones I've had in the past were either really young or sourced from George Dickel, which is not my favorite Tennessee whiskey. But yeah, I'm excited to see this added to their lineup. I think it's always good to see one, new age statements, and two, bottled in bond releases because that means they're taking their stuff seriously and I commend them for it. So check that out. Let me know how it is if you get a chance to try it before me. All right, we have two new whiskeys coming to us from Dancing Goat Distillery. They are based out of Cambridge, Wisconsin. And they have a new 10-year Stillman's Sonder straight bourbon whiskey and a 10-year Stillman's Sonder American single malt whiskey. Now, both of these were sourced from MGP in Indiana, but that happened over 10 years ago. From 2010 to 2016, there was a bunch of exploratory casks done at MGP that never really got used. So Dancing Goat went and picked these up, did some blending of their own, and came out with this product. So the bourbon is going to be bottled at 94 proof, and it seems to be doing really well in the competitions. It got a double gold and a 98-point rating at the San Francisco World Spirits Competition. Their American single malt is going to be bottled at 96.4 proof, and it's been finished across a range of casks, including virgin oak, ex-bourbon, Wisconsin brandy, cognac, and Calvados. So not sure why they went through all 3 rounds of blending and rebarreling, but they seem pretty confident in it. Now, these are both going to be released online and across select US retailers at a retail price of $70 per bottle. They're also going to be doing limited single barrel selections of each. So that's something to keep an eye out for sure. So this is definitely one I'd love a chance to try. Just getting to try something that old from MGP is exciting in itself, but for 70 bucks, I'd give it a try. All right, lastly, I want to quickly mention the new Bulleit 87. I think I touched on this when the TTB label came out. We didn't know much about it, but Bulleit is blending their bourbon and rye together like a lot of brands have been doing lately. I still don't get why that's a thing, but it's become a thing. And they're calling it Bulleit 87, and it's going to come out in September for a low, low price of $29.99. But they do say the bourbon is distilled and aged in Shelbyville, Kentucky, while the rye is distilled and aged in Indiana before moving to Shelbyville. And both whiskeys are aged for a minimum of 4 years. So we do have an age statement, it is 90 proof. And the last twist that makes this even more interesting is both the bourbon and the rye elements of this blend are finished separately in their own barrels with toasted American oak and French oak staves. And they say they finish them from about 4 to 6 weeks before being blended. So it does add an additional layer to it. It's not like they're just taking their bourbon and rye, mashing it together. They're doing some unique finishing on it. So again, another one that I'd love to try. I do love Bulleit Rye. I think it's a great expression of affordable 95.5 rye from MGP. And I'd like to see how some Kentucky bourbon tastes blended into that. So I'm not going to knock it till I try it. I think it's a great price point. And you know what? I might finally catch on to this boo rye trend. We'll see. All right. Well, that does it for this week's news. Now let's get into our bite-sized review. All right. Well, this is a fun bottle that was sent to me by the brand, and I love a bourbon with a good story, and even more so, a bourbon that gives back. So, when the folks from Locke and Key Distilling reached out to me, I was very excited to review their Big Blaze bourbon. So this comes to us from a distillery out of Denver, Colorado, and this is their second release of this Big Blaze bourbon, which is one of their limited edition series. And this one's labeled the East Troublesome Fire Edition, and it's a tribute to the fire that broke out in October of 2020 in the central Rocky Mountains of Grand County. They say that it rapidly grew into a 10,000 acre inferno that spread to Grand Lake and Rocky Mountain National Park. It destroyed more than 400 homes and scorched over 193,000 acres. This was the second largest wildfire in Colorado's history, and this tribute bottle actually goes back to support the cause. So 10% of all the sales benefit firefighters and first responders of Grand County, Colorado. And that's actually a huge chunk. I see these tribute bottles that give 1 or 2%, but giving a full 10% to a cause very, very local is so exciting, and I'm honored to be able to feature this bottle on the channel. Now, let's talk about the whiskey itself. This is a 95 proof bourbon at 5-year age statement that's been finished in charred aspen discs sourced directly from the wildfire area. So they say the spirit is created literally from the ashes of the blaze. Now, it is worth mentioning that this is a Kentucky bourbon. They don't say where it's actually distilled other than just in Kentucky for a minimum of 5 years, but they did do the aging in Lakewood, Colorado with that secondary finish. And like I said, this one comes in at 95 proof and has a retail price of $58.99. There's a really cool artwork on the front. It's a sketch of firefighters walking into a blaze. Really, really interesting story and really cool. They featured the different logos of the fire stations on the back. Just a really cool bottle in general. They say this is available to purchase online in 48 states across the nation, as well as being available in Colorado bars, restaurants, and liquor stores. So I'm really curious to see how that aspen wood finish affects this whiskey. I think that makes it one of the most unique finishes just because it has the story to go along with it. We see the tornado surviving bottles from Buffalo Trace, which have been affected by that climate change of the tornado, so there is something there, but this is even more directly impacted, I think. So let's go ahead and give this a nose. Oh yeah, yeah. It's got a nice extra layer of toastiness that I wouldn't expect as much on a 5-year bourbon. It's like a really warming kind of toasted oak note. A little bit nutty, but very, very sweet. I mean, 5-year bourbon tends to be a little bit more in the vanilla category, but that toasted element is adding another layer to it, and I like it on the nose. There's a little bit of a muscadine grape note there as well. I'm not sure if that's coming from the finish of the bourbon itself, but it's interesting to get that much fruitiness combined with that toastiness. That's rare in a bourbon. Nice. Well, overall, good nose. Let's go in for a taste. Cheers. Oh, yeah. That toastiness carries through, but it almost goes a little chocolatey on the palate. It's still that very sweet, youngish bourbon. There's some spice there a little bit, but that toastiness kind of brings out this darker element that kind of reads like a bitter chocolate on it. But it's a nice balance because, like I said, it's sweet. So that bitter chocolate really elevates it and makes it a little bit more complex than I would get from other bourbons around this age. Finish wise, I would say about medium. I think it does linger with that toasted element and then finishes with like that sweet, sugary vanilla. Yeah, that's a solid sipper. I do think that finish on it does bring a new layer to it that, one, adds to their story, and two, really brings a little more depth to what would be seen as a little bit of a lackluster whiskey. It really does enhance it and brings it to the next level. Not just that, but it's for a good cause. It's won big in the Ascot Awards from Fred Minnick, and it just seems to be doing really well in local whiskey competitions, including the Denver International Spirits Competition. So for this being my first time trying Locke & Co., I'm pretty impressed. I think this is a solid foundation. I love a bourbon with a good story, and it seems like a lot of their other releases are collaborations to support different causes or different brands. I love to see that. I think it's a really unique take on what the bourbon industry does, and as long as they're continuing to support good causes, I'm 100% here for it. So here on the Bourbon Bytes podcast, I like to give just one score for these bottles that I review out of 10. I think this one combines a solid base bourbon with a good story and an interesting finish. So I'm going to give this one a 6.5 out of 10. It's a little bit pricey, but knowing 10% of that bottle purchase supports local firefighters and first responders makes it worth it in my mind. Would I like it to be a little bit older, maybe a little bit higher proof? Yes, but I think overall this is a fun bottle. It is a great story behind it, and it's a great reminder of all of the great work that first responders and firefighters do, not just in Colorado. I mean, I live in Southern California where wildfires are so devastating. We've had so many in the past few years that have just wiped out whole communities. So I have nothing but love for fire departments and first responders, and what a cool way to support the local community and tribute those that were affected by that fire. So well done, Locke & Co. All right, that does it for this week's episode. Thank you all so much for listening. I'll be back next month. We're heading into the fall. So stay tuned. I'm your host, Clifton. This has been the Bourbon Bytes podcast, a whiskey podcast with a gaming twist. Cheers, and I'll talk to you next episode.